Hey, 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 and welcome to the lecture for chapters 2 through 4. The reason this is all combined together is because this should be a review from some biology course you've had in your past. Maybe high school, maybe in college, but this is really the meat and potatoes of biology. And I know this is anatomy, but you do want to understand the basic principles of biology before we can move forward. In saying that, for this part of the course, it will be easier for some than others. If you haven't taken a biology course in a while, you're probably going to want to take your time and really study this. If you'll notice at the beginning of each section on the study guide, and hopefully you've got that printed out and you're looking at it, there is a video, or it's just on some of them, but there's a video for additional information on that section. So I'm kind of going to go through this pretty fast, and I expect you to read the handout, and I expect you to watch the additional videos. They're not me. The additional videos that are linked there. Okay, so this PowerPoint you're seeing is just pictures. An element. There are 92 naturally occurring elements, and this you've heard of these: carbon, hydrogen, and when you put two elements together, that makes a compound. So when you put hydrogen with oxygen, we of course know that that makes the compound water, right? Let me fix that there. If you add another two, that makes it hydrogen peroxide. And so there's 92 that naturally occur. Actually, all living things have 6, and that is carbon. Let's see. All living things have carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, and phosphorus, and sulfur. So all living things have those, and the way I memorized that when I first learned this was chinops. I don't know, I just made a word out of it. So that might help you. But elements are the building blocks. Matter is anything that takes up space, and then atoms are the tiny building blocks inside the matter. So there's, hydrogen is made up of hydrogen atoms. Carbon is made up of carbon atoms. So atoms are smaller. Okay, the atomic structure. So what is an atom, I guess? This is what it looks like. In the middle, it's got protons and neutrons. And then around it, it's got negatively charged electrons. So you'll see this image here. You've probably seen Jimmy Neutron and kind of have an idea of this picture. The atomic number, which if you look back at my periodic table, the atomic number is this little number at the top. So hydrogen is 1. That's the number of protons, and that's really what defines the atom, the atomic number. So if it's got 6 protons, it's carbon. That's how we define it. So if you find an atom that has, if you find an element that has 6 atoms of proton, then it's got to be carbon. The atomic mass, so go back to this, the atomic mass is protons plus neutrons. Those little electrons, that's the red floating around, the electrons are so small they don't count towards mass. So protons and neutrons, which are in the middle, make up the mass. And the electrons, which are drawn here, the black circles, they orbit around the nucleus. And they're really important because that's how it bonds. Because of the electrons, the number of electrons, the different elements bond together to make compounds or molecules. Right? So you'll see here like hydrogen, you can see the 1 electron, 1 proton, that image there. Okay, so here's a picture of it bonding. And so you can see the electrons are bonding together. So chemical bonds are attraction between atoms, and there's 3 types of chemical bonds we're going to talk about. There's covalent, which is where they share, highlight, underline the word share. Covalent share electrons. Okay, and that's what you can see here. They're, all atoms want to have 8 electrons in their outer shell. So here's the outer shell. Everybody wants to have 8. 8 is happy. And so if you look, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that's it. It's only got 4 by itself, or actually I think it has 6 by itself. Yeah, because this is carbon, so it's got 6 by itself, but okay, so 6 by itself, and then it actually has 2 inside. I'm sorry, this is not carbon, it's oxygen. But that's not important anyway. So here's an oxygen, and it's got 6 on the outside. You only have 2 on the inside, and then up to 8 on the outsides. Everybody wants to have 8 on the outside. So if you think about just this one, it wants 2 more. To be happy, it would need 2 more. 2 more electrons. So what it does is it binds with this other oxygen who also needs 2 more electrons, and they share. So I'll let you hold one of mine and you let me hold one of yours. We'll share 2 of them, and then we'll both have 8. And so covalent bonds are very strong bonds. Covalent bonds are very strong. So you want to know they share and they're strong. Okay, ionic bonds are just the opposite. There's a covalent bond again. Sharing. Ionic bonds are just the opposite. They highlight or underline transfer. So covalent share, ionic transfer. So if you look at the sodium, here, look at the sodium. It's going to take one of its electrons. Remember, it wants to have 8. So if you look, it's got 1 on the outside. Ooh, so it needs 7 more? No. It'd be easier just to give that away, because then it's got, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's got 8 right there. If it could get rid of that 1, it'd have 8 in the outer shell. So it gives its 1 to chlorine, who needs 1, and that makes a ionic bond. Ionic bonds are not quite as strong. Okay, an ion is anything that has a charged particle. Okay, so an ion is anything with a charged particle. If it's got a positive or a negative, cation would be positive, anion would be negative. So let me go back. This is easy. Look at the word. It's got a plus sign in it. That's positive. Anion is negative. So anything like calcium Ca+, that's a charged particle. So it is a cation. An anion would be something with a negative charge. So just for example, PO4 negative 2, you know that's anion because it's got that little negative 2 charge. Okay, the third type of bond. So we had covalent, they share. Ionic, they transfer. Hydrogen bonds is the last example of a bond. And the key here is that it's got hydrogen bonded to something else normally negative, right? And the most important thing about water, well, besides that you have to drink it, is that it has hydrogen bonds. And water has all these really cool properties that you learned when you watched that video, I'm sure. All these really cool properties, and all the properties of water are because of those unique hydrogen bonds. So water sticks together, it's called cohesion, because of hydrogen bonds. So little bugs can walk on the water, and probably the most important is that water can go up trees from the rain. It can go all the way up to the leaves. Water has that's the capillary action. Water is a solvent. It can dissolve sugars and things like that. So all of that is because of the hydrogen bonds in water. Now, water is a polar molecule. What does the word polar mean? The word polar means that in the molecule, part of the molecule is positive and part of the molecule is negative. So if you look at water right here, we know oxygen has a negative charge and hydrogen has a positive charge. So that's how it binds together right there. It's got the 2 hydrogens and the 1 oxygen, and those are hydrogen bonds. But part of the molecule is, if you look, positive, and part of the molecule is negative. And so we call that a polar molecule. Nonpolar would be something that has the same charge throughout, like an oil. Okay, so pH scale. Anything below 7 we consider an acid, and anything above 7 we consider a base. So 2 is acidic and 10 is alkaline, the word basic. And so just kind of some information that's interesting. Human blood has a pH of 7.4. Maybe a little more than that. There we go, 7.4. The human stomach has very acidic, more like 2. I'm not good with my thing, am I? There we go. More like 2. And so here's the key. Acids are going to release hydrogens into the atmosphere. Bases are going to release hydroxides. So let me try all that again. Here we go. Acids are going to release hydrogens, and bases are going to release hydroxides. And that's the difference in them. So how strong or how weak depends on it. Okay, an electrolyte is anything that forms an ion when dissolved. So it forms a charged particle. Potassium, calcium, chlorine, all of those are electrolytes. And we know about electrolytes because of, commercials like Gatorade and Smart Water or whatever. Okay, when you look at this pH scale, things you specifically want to make sure that you know. 7 is neutral. You also want to know 0 to 6 is acidic, and 8 to 14 is basic or alkaline. So make sure you got that kind of written down somewhere special. Okay, first of all, let me identify the word organic. An organic molecule is anything that is alive, was alive, or came from a living thing. So I am organic. Trees are organic. And generally it's anything that contains carbon and hydrogen. Okay, so CO2 is not organic, even though it comes from us. We breathe it out. It's not considered organic because it doesn't have that hydrogen in it. But there are 4 main organic compounds, which you'll see here in the picture and on your notes, that all living things must have. We must have these 4 organic compounds. First one is going to be carbohydrates. And when you think about carbohydrates, we all think about bread and pasta. But carbohydrates, they're big, complex forms of sugar. And they really provide you with quick energy. So if you eat bread, you're going to be able to break that bread down and use lots of energy. However, if you're going to continue to sit on the couch, you're going to store the carbohydrates. And your body actually turns them into fat, believe it or not. So with carbohydrates, it's energy, but there's different kinds. There's a monosaccharide, which would be, mono means simple. Right, so mono is simple. Disaccharide would be 2. And then the prefix poly means many. So let's say I ate bread, and I love bread, don't we all? I ate bread for, something. I ate for a snack. And what I didn't use, the marathon I didn't run, I stored, you definitely want to know this, you store that in your liver as a form of glycogen. So our carbohydrate that we store is glycogen. So you eat the bread or even sweets, and you store it as a complex carb in your liver called glycogen. Okay, the next organic molecule is a lipid. And a lipid is just a fat, right? Avocados have good fats. Almonds, as you can see here. But it's a fat. If it's solid at room temperature, it's considered an oil. If it's liquid at room temperature, it's made up of 1 glycerol, which is just a molecule made up of carbon and hydrogen. So it's 1 glycerol with 3 fatty acids. The fatty acids are long carbon and hydrogen chains. Now, a phospholipid, which is important, the phospholipid is what makes up your cell membrane. So all the cells you've studied, we're going to get to some in a second, all the cells you've studied They have a cell membrane around the outside. All of this is the cell membrane, made up of 2 layers of phospholipids. And that's why we call it, it says 2 fatty acid attached to a phosphate group. So that's a fatty acid, that's a fatty acid, and that's your phosphate group. So it kind of looks like this. So you got your phosphate, fatty acid, and then this one has a little propped out leg, fatty acid. The head of the phosphate is hydrophilic, so think about it would drink the water. It loves water. And the tails are like cat feet. They hate water. Okay, next is a protein. And the protein, if I could pick a favorite organic molecule, I know I'm a nerd, I would pick a protein, because proteins are so important in our life. Not only do we need to eat them, like in meat and eggs and nuts, things like that, they have a lot of functions inside our life, and so inside our body. So if you think back to that cell membrane I was just talking about, and I said it had phospholipids, well, the cell membrane also has proteins, big red proteins, little bitty phospholipids and proteins. So those proteins, they help your cells maintain structure. They can be a source of energy. They are hormones. So some hormones are made out of proteins. Not all, but most. Hormones are proteins. On the cell membrane, if your cell is going to receive a molecule, it's going to be received by the protein. Proteins are antibodies. Proteins are enzymes. Now, what is an enzyme? An enzyme is just a protein that has a specific job. For example, the protein amylase in your mouth helps with digestion of carbs. So amylase is a protein or enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates. So I would say the proteins are the doers. They're the workers. And the reason I have this picture on the left, the one on the right, is an antibody. That's an antibody. The one on the left, that is an amino acid structure. So proteins are made up of a bunch of amino acids. So like a house is made out of bricks, proteins are made out of amino acids. So you really want to make sure that you know all about proteins. Know their functions, number 1 on the student handout. And then you want to know what they're made of. They're made up of amino acids. And they have a peptide bond. A peptide bond is a type of covalent bond. What is covalent? Sharing electrons. I hope you knew that. And then the last organic molecule is nucleic acid. So your DNA or your RNA. They are made up of nucleotides. A nucleotide is, I was trying to see if it was on the paper, but it's not. A nucleotide is just the pieces of the DNA. Phosphates, sugars, and then these nitrogen bases over here. Those are nitrogen bases I'm highlighting. Okay. And RNA is half of DNA. So you'll see on the picture, the structure on the left, that's RNA. The structure on the right, it's like a twisted ladder. You probably heard of that, a helix or something. That's DNA, both of which are made out of nucleotides. Okay, if you'll look, guanine and adenine, see how they have 2 carbon rings? Well, they are considered purines because they have 2 carbon rings. Cytosine, uracil, and thymine only have 1 carbon ring, so they are considered pyrimidines. Uracil is only in RNA, and thymine is only in DNA. Okay, let's do this. See if you can list the 4 organic molecules. List what they're made of. And give me some special facts about it. Right, so make you a table, perhaps. So do something like this for me. So you got carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acid. Go back and look at your notes if you can't fill it in. Okay, the next part of the video is about the eukaryotic cell. And I think by now, I hope, you know that you are made up of, all living things are made up of, billions of cells. Okay, so we know that the cell membrane, which is the outer portion, is made up of lipids and proteins, phospholipids and proteins, and that's what allows certain substances like water to come into our cell, and certain substances like sugar not to come into our cell. Or sugar can come sometimes it can't. Okay, the nucleus is in the middle. You would definitely want to know all the parts of this on the test. This part is matching, so you want to know like the cell membrane and what it does. It allows the passage of materials in and out made up of phospholipids and proteins. So this part of the test is matching, so make sure you know it. Okay, the nucleus, that's where the DNA is. Right? The DNA and RNA are right there in the center, or the genetic information. Okay, all this other light purple out here, that's all cytoplasm, semi-fluid component of the cell that contains all the organelles. Okay, the ribosomes, those are the little polka dots that you can see on this, on the rough ER right here. So little polka dots. And that is where the proteins are synthesized or made. That's where proteins are made. Okay, the endoplasmic reticulum, that's where the proteins are transported. So the whole goal of this cell is to make a specific protein and then use it. Ship it out of the cell or keep it in the cell and use it. And so if this was a white blood cell, a B cell specifically, the function is to make an antibody, which we already know is a protein. And it's going to be made in the ribosome. It's going to be transported in the rough ER. And then the smooth ER, it can also transport. But you want to know that's where lipids are made. Lipids are made on the smooth ER. I can remember that because lipid is like an oil, and oil is shiny and smooth. I don't know. It helps me. Okay, the Golgi, that's where the protein is folded and put together. So if more than one protein needs to be bound together, that's where that happens. So the Golgi, which is this right here, this like orange color, functions as the processing, packaging, and distribution center. Okay, the lysosome, just like Lysol, the cleaning thing, it cleans out the cell. That's easy. The mitochondria, that's where the cell gets all the energy to do this. And you do want to know that the word or letters ATP, adenosine triphosphate, that's energy. So you don't have to know how to spell those words or even know those words, but I do want you to be able to know when you see ATP, that means energy inside my body. So your body breaks down candy bars and makes ATP, which you use for energy. So you don't use batteries. You use ATP made from food. Okay, and then the flagellum, that is, let's see my picture of flagellum. Nope. Okay, so flagellum would be a little hair-like structure that's used for movement. And the only human body cell that has a long flagella used for movement is sperm. You've all seen a picture of a sperm, I'm sure, on a movie or commercial or something. And then cilia are little short-like cells. I bet this right here is cilia. Little short-like hair-like structures that they're also for movement, but we have cilia that lines our digestive system and our respiratory system. Little bitty hairs that helps with the processes. Okay, so take a minute. Here's what I would do, and look at that picture on the student handout and see if you can write the function underneath each of those. So that'll probably help you remember that. Okay, cell transport. So getting molecules inside and out of the cell. If it's passive transport, which you'll see over here, oh, not that way. If it's passive transport, that does not require energy. And you're moving molecules, look, you're moving molecules from high concentration to low concentration. So let's say there's 15 molecules here, and there's only 2 here. Whoops, sorry, my phone's ringing. Okay, sorry about that. Passive, high concentration to low concentration. Highlight that. It says that under diffusion, but really it's all of them. High concentration to an area of low concentration. So diffusion is the movement of molecules. Osmosis is the movement of water. And then facilitated diffusion is where it's still high to low, it's still no energy, but it has to have a protein channel to travel through. So it needs a little special facilitator, right? So osmosis, diffusion, and facilitated diffusion are all passive transport, which means, the word passive transport means no energy required. Okay, active transport is the opposite. It requires, look at that, you know that ATP is energy. So active transport is opposite. You're going from actually low to high. So you're going the other way. You're going against the normal ways. Like you're trying to go down the interstate going the wrong way. But for active transport, it's normally going to go through a channel, or it's going to have to be the cell membrane. See how you can tell right here, the cell membrane actually has to pinch off and form a vesicle or a bubble. And so the engulfing of the substance inside the cell. So the cell, which is this large tan thing, this is the cell, wants to get looks like these are antibodies, inside. And so the cell is going to actually pinch off and bring this bubble here we call a vesicle. And that's how it got inside. That requires energy. So that would be coming in, and of course the opposite would be, going out. Pretty easy there. So, but the key ideas are right here on this picture. Passive doesn't require energy, and active does require energy. You also want to know that passive transport is high concentration to low concentration. Think about if you're walking down a hill. It's pretty easy. High part of the hill to the low part of the hill, it doesn't require energy. If you try to do the opposite, walk up the hill, it requires energy. Okay, we've made it to cell division or mitosis. How does cells, when you were born, you were little bitty, and now you're jumbo. No offense, I'm just kidding. But how did you get from that little size to the size you are now? It's not because you stretched, it's because your cells divided. Okay, you had a little tumor. How did that tumor of cancer get all over the body? Mitosis, the cells divided. One cell made 2 cells, made 3 cells, made 4 cells. So the key here is, and write this in for me, mitosis is cell division needed for growth, needed to grow, we already said that one, needed for maintenance, so to replace cells, to fix cells when you get a cut, of somatic, that's body cells, right? Diploid cells that have 2 sets of every chromosome. That's a somatic cell. Okay, so that's what mitosis is how the cell goes from 1 to 2. When you cut your arm, how does your skin fix itself? And really, there's 4 phases to mitosis, and they are prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Okay, when the cell is not dividing, we call that interphase. So interphase is the in-between. So it's dividing and then not dividing. And really the cell spends much more time not dividing. Kind of like, we spend much more time not pregnant. So normally the cell is an interphase. It's making its normal protein. It's doing its normal jobs. And then you can see there's 3 steps. There's G1, S, and G2. And then mitosis would be prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. Okay, so you can look at the picture and see with prophase, the chromatin, which is loosely coiled spaghetti-like DNA, is going to coil up and make chromosomes. In metaphase, those chromosomes are going to line up in the middle. In anaphase, you can see them right there. The anaphase, they start to pull apart. And then in telophase or telophase, pronounced either way, the nuclear membrane comes back, and those chromosomes go back into their spaghetti form, chromatin. So chromatin is loosely coiled, and chromosomes, those are the X-shaped. They're both DNA, but chromatin is loose and in the nucleus, and chromosomes, that's what lines up and separates. In metaphase, it lines up. In anaphase, it draws towards opposite sides. Okay, so here's what I want you to look at. So here's prophase, and you've got chromatin. In prophase, so hopefully you're drawing this with me and you've gotten the word prophase somewhere. In prophase, the chromatin is going to line up, the chromatin is going to coil up and become chromosomes. And the nuclear membrane, let's see if I can do this. The nuclear membrane is actually going to disappear. So here I'm kind of making it disappear a little. So in prophase, the chromatin condenses to make chromosomes. The nuclear membrane breaks down, and then the nucleolus, which was right here inside, the nucleolus was inside the nucleus, it completely disappears. So highlight all that. You want to know what happens in prophase. Okay, in metaphase, all the chromosomes, so all these green chromosomes, are going to line up in the middle. And you can remember that because M, middle, M, metaphase. They line up, your notes say the chromosomes line up at the center or the equator. Okay, in anaphase, let's see, I'm going to make this metaphase right here, anaphase. In anaphase, these chromosomes right here, they start to pull apart. Because the cell is starting to divide, and they have spindle fibers pull them apart. In telophase, we got to get the whole cell to go back to normal. And remember, normal is what we looked at before with the cell. Normal is nucleus, nucleolus, chromatin. And can you remember what chromatin is? Chromatin is loosely coiled DNA, right? Spaghetti-like. And then cytokinesis is actually where the cell completely divides. And so you'll see that in that bottom right picture. That's cytokinesis. Okay, cell respiration. That is, how does your cells get energy? So write this in. Cell respiration is, I want you to write this down, the sum of all chemical reactions that take place so that is metabolism right there. It's the sum, make sure you got the word metabolism written. The sum of all chemical reactions. Now, there's two different parts to metabolism, and they are anabolism, the build up, and catabolism, the break down. Think about ants. What do they do to their houses? Well, they build up ant farms. Okay, so they build up little ant houses and build up. Golly, there we go. Catabolism is the breakdown. tear apart. So in order to make energy, you've got to break down the pizza you had for lunch, and you've got to build the proteins and the DNA, maybe store the glycogen, whatever. You have to build it up. So if you look at this picture, it just shows two forms of energy. There's potential energy, right? And then the kinetic energy is actually the moving energy. Well, energy in a molecule, like in a piece of pizza, is potential. It's not in your body. You're not using it. You've got to break that pizza apart and actually make the ATP, or the kinetic energy. Okay, here's the thing of enzymes, and we already know about enzymes. Enzymes are proteins that have a job. They are proteins that break down carbs or break down proteins, or they're enzymes are proteins that do something. They serve as catalysts. They speed up the reactions, and whatever they act on, look at the picture, whatever the red part is a substrate. And whatever they create, like the green and blue, is the product. Okay, this is a picture that sums up cell respiration. And truth be told, if you could remember this, you're doing good. Okay, cell respiration is the process where, write this down, you break glucose, really any food, but the test says glucose, so let's go with that, and release energy. So you got to break down the OSE, that means it's a sugar. You got to break down the food, and that's going to make the energy, or the ATP. Okay, looking at this, there are 3 steps. There's glycolysis here. Outside of the organelle is called the mitochondria, right? You knew that. 3 steps. Glycolysis is step 1. Let's erase all this, and let's go with purple. Here we go. Glycolysis is step 1. The Krebs cycle is step 2. And then the 3rd step is the electron transport chain. Okay, so starting out with glycolysis, and it tells you aerobic requires oxygen, anaerobic doesn't. Okay, so glycolysis is the first one, and that's where you're going to take the sugar and you're going to break it in 2. You're going to break it apart. And that way, really what it is sugar is too big to go inside. So the sugar can now go inside. You broke it into 2 things called pyruvates, or pyruvic acid. And that's going to give you 2 ATP, 2 NADH. And all NADH is a molecule that carries electrons to the 3rd step, electron transport chain. Okay. Once you get in, those pyruvates actually have to be converted into acetyl-CoA. So right here, they're converted. Right where this arrow is, right here. Okay, now acetyl-CoA, used to be pyruvate, is going to go through the Krebs cycle. There. The Krebs cycle, named after Hans Krebs, the British scientist that came up with it, is going to take the acetyl-CoA and make oxaloacetate. And really, these things are just for information. This is not too important, the middle parts, but you want to know the 3 steps. Okay, the Krebs cycle happens inside the mitochondria. That's why it's drawn inside there. And it's going to make 2 ATP and 2 FADH from each pyruvate. Well, the pyruvate, which was the split of sugar, so that's going to happen twice. So it's going to make 4 ATP. What is ATP? Sugar. That's the whole point. Focus on the goal here, is to take the glucose, break it apart, and make ATP. 4 ATP and 6 NADH. It's actually 2 ATP. I'm sorry. So you got 2 from each. So 1 from each. So 2 total. And then, so 2 ATP, 2 FADH, and then 6 total NADH. And FADH and NADH are both just electron carriers. So don't get bumfuzzled about that. Okay, so remember, let me go back here. We made those electron carriers, right? You made 2 here. If you remember, you made 2 NADH here. and you made 6 NADH here, and 2 FADH. Okay, they're electron carriers, like a school bus of electrons. And so they take the electrons right there to the electron transport chain. Let me give you the easy version. The electrons go down this chain of phospholipids, and that produces way more ATP than 2, which is what we got from glycolysis and the Krebs cycle. So most of the energy is produced here. Right, so total you have, and it depends on you and it depends on what you ate, but roughly, give or take, about 32 molecules of ATP. Okay, fermentation, which is the last thing, thank goodness this is a long video. Fermentation is without oxygen, right? No oxygen required. And the truth is, without oxygen, you can't make as much energy. Without oxygen, we can only do glycolysis right here. You're going to stay right here. So you're not making the 2 from the Krebs cycle, and you're not making the 32 ATP from electron transport chain. So you're only getting 2. That's why you can't survive long without oxygen. That's why when you're working out, your muscles start burning because you can't get oxygen fast enough. Lactic acid is what's in muscles. And throughout the course, I'm going to teach you all about lactic acid, so we won't spend too much time there now. But the key you want to know about fermentation is that it is without oxygen. Okay, as you go back through this video, please remember that this is a lot of information. It's chapters 3 chapters, 2, 3, and 4, in only 40 minutes. So that's pretty impressive. Make sure you go back through here, watch the other videos, and don't hesitate to ask me questions as we go over this. Hope you enjoyed this.